You are no longer fit to lead us.
I will go to war with you.
The wheelchair isn't permanent, the doctor said, but his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering a death sentence. With extensive physical therapy, you may regain some mobility, some sensation. Yoon Tae-young stared at the ceiling of his hospital room and said nothing. Outside, Seoul hummed with the life of 10 million people who didn't know that one of the city's most feared men could no longer feel his legs. May, he repeated finally. The spinal compression was severe. The surgery went well, but the doctor glanced at the chart, then at the two men in expensive suits standing by the window. Recovery varies significantly in these cases. Tae-young turned his head toward those men. Park Sung-min, his father's chief advisor, and Kim Do-hyun, his own second-in-command. They'd maintained vigil for 3 days, taking calls in whispered Korean, their faces grave with appropriate concern. Neither would meet his eyes now. "How long until I can return to work?" Tae-young asked. The silence stretched too long. Do-hyun cleared his throat. "Your father thinks it would be best if you focused on recovery first, without the pressure of daily operations." Translation: his father had already chosen someone else. "I see." Tae-young's voice remained calm, controlled. 29 years of training in emotional discipline held even now. And who will be handling my responsibilities? Your cousin Jung-wook has agreed to step in temporarily. Temporarily. Another word that meant forever in this context. Hey, before we continue, drop a comment about where you're listening from tonight. Stories like this need witnesses. The attack had happened on a Tuesday. 3 men with military precision, a stolen van, and detailed knowledge of his security protocols. Tae-young had survived because his driver had been faster than expected, and because he'd worn a bulletproof vest. The bullets that shattered his spine had been meant for his heart. Now, lying in pristine hospital linens, he understood that they'd succeeded anyway. They'd killed the man who mattered. Nernans, the leader, the heir, the future of the Yoon organization. What remained was just flesh and bone, and the awkward problem of what to do with it. The estate in Gangwon province is being prepared, Sung-min said. Quiet, private, good for recovery. Exile. They were calling it recovery, but it was exile. Tae-young nodded slowly. When? Tomorrow, if you're ready. He almost smiled at that, ready to disappear from his own life, ready to become a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power, ready to let others decide his worth based on what his body could no longer do. I'm ready, he said. The estate sat 2 hours northeast of Seoul, surrounded by mountains and silence. Tae-young had bought it years ago as a retreat, somewhere to bring women who needed discretion, somewhere to conduct business that required absolute privacy. He'd never imagined it as a prison. The staff had been reduced to the minimum: a groundskeeper, a cook, and a housekeeper. Most of the regular employees had found reasons to transfer to other properties, other families, other futures that didn't involve caring for a fallen leader. Naomi Sterling was the exception. She was 19, American-born, the daughter of a military contractor who'd married a Korean woman and settled in Seoul. Her mother worked in the main household in the city. Naomi had been assigned to the estate 6 months ago, a temporary position that had become permanent when no one else wanted it. She was also the only person who looked directly at him when she spoke. Your room is on the ground floor, she said as the medical transport team wheeled him through the front entrance. We've installed grab bars in the bathroom and lowered the closet rods. The physical therapist will come twice a week. Her voice was crisp, professional, matter of fact. No pity, no awkward sympathy, no careful avoidance of the obvious. She treated his wheelchair like a piece of furniture, something to navigate around, not something to pretend didn't exist. Thank you, he said, and meant it.
The room they'd prepared faced the garden, with wide windows and doors that opened onto a stone patio. His bed was hospital grade, but disguised with expensive linens. A desk had been positioned at wheelchair height. Someone had thought through the details. "Did you arrange this?" he asked as the transport team left them alone.
I made suggestions. Naomi moved around the room, checking that everything was positioned correctly. She was small, maybe 5'4", with natural hair pulled back and skin the color of strong coffee. Her uniform was simple and practical, but she moved with a grace that suggested dance training or athletics. Your cousin sent specifications, but he's never used a wheelchair. And you have? My grandmother. After her stroke, I lived with her for 2 years. She met his eyes directly. The most important thing is maintaining independence where possible. Independence. Such a small word for something so completely lost. I should let you rest, Naomi continued. Dinner is at 6 if you're hungry, but I can bring something to your room if you prefer. I'll eat in my room. She nodded without judgment and headed for the door. As she reached it, Taeyang called her name. Miss Sterling. She turned back. Why are you still here? Everyone else found reasons to leave. Naomi considered the question seriously. Because someone needs to be, and because you've never been anything but respectful to staff. It was such a simple answer, and so devastating. Respect. Basic human decency. The bar was apparently lower than he'd realized. After she left, Taeyang transferred himself to the bed and stared out at the garden. Spring was coming to the mountains. Soon everything would be green and alive and growing. He wondered if he would be. The first week was the hardest. His body ached in ways the pain medication couldn't touch, and his mind replayed the attack endlessly, searching for clues he'd missed, signs he should have seen. The betrayal cut deeper than the bullets. Someone he trusted had sold his route, his timing, his security protocols. Naomi brought his meals and managed his care with quiet efficiency. She helped him transfer to the shower chair without making it feel like weakness. She reminded him about physical therapy appointments without nagging. She treated him like a person who happened to need assistance, not like an object that required maintenance. Tell me about yourself, he said on the 4th day, as she helped him with exercises the therapist had prescribed. Not much to tell. Born in San Francisco. Moved here when I was 12. My mother wanted to be closer to her family. Do you miss America? Sometimes, but Korea feels like home now. She guided his leg through range of motion stretches, her touch clinical but gentle. What about you? Do you miss your old life? The question was direct, in a way that would have been impossible from anyone else. Staff didn't ask personal questions. Associates didn't acknowledge that his life had fundamentally changed. Only Naomi seemed to understand that avoiding the subject wasn't kindness. It was erasure. Every day, he said honestly. The power, the fear, the control, the certainty. Knowing who I was, what I was supposed to do, what mattered. He watched her work, the careful attention she paid to movements he couldn't feel. I spent my entire life preparing to lead that organization. Without it, I don't know what I'm supposed to be. You're supposed to be whatever you choose to be. The wheelchair doesn't change that. Doesn't it? Naomi paused in her movements and looked at him directly. My grandmother was a federal judge before her stroke. After, she couldn't walk, could barely speak clearly, but her mind was sharp as ever. She spent her last 3 years mentoring young lawyers, writing legal opinions for a civil rights organization, making sure her knowledge didn't die with her body. That's different. How? Taeyang couldn't answer that, or wouldn't. Your cousin called, Naomi said, changing the subject with the same practical directness. He wants to visit next week. What did you tell him? That you'd call him back. She finished the exercises and helped him transfer back to his wheelchair. But I should mention, I listened to part of the conversation. He seemed more interested in confirming you were settled than in actually visiting. Translation: Jung-wook wanted to make sure his exile was proceeding smoothly. Thank you for the warning. That evening, Taeyang called his cousin back. Taeyang, how are you feeling? How's the recovery going? Slow but steady. No need to elaborate on the reality. How are things in Seoul? Good, good. Busy, you know how it is. Your father sends his regards. His father, who hadn't visited once, who hadn't called personally, who'd made his choice and moved on. Jungwook, Taeyang said carefully. I've been thinking about some of the contracts we had in development. The shipping arrangement with the Osaka group, the new money transfers through Singapore. Are those still moving forward? A pause. Well, we've had to put some things on hold while we transition leadership responsibilities. I see. And the Osaka group is comfortable with that delay? They understand the situation. Taeyang doubted that. The Osaka group had specifically requested to work with him personally, had spent months building trust. They wouldn't appreciate being shuffled to someone else without explanation. If you need any background on those relationships, I'm available to consult. That's generous of you, but I think we have it handled. You should focus on getting better. The dismissal was gentle, but final. Jungwook wasn't interested in his knowledge, his relationships, or his strategic insights. He wanted Taeyang to disappear quietly and leave him to inherit an empire. After hanging up, Taeyang sat in the dark for a long time, thinking. When Naomi brought his evening medication, she found him at the desk, writing. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Making a list." Of what? People who owe me favors, people who might still be loyal, people who would benefit if certain truths came to light. Naomi set down the medication and sat in the chair across from him. Are you planning something? I'm planning to remember who I am. Taeyang looked up from his notes. Someone tried to kill me. Someone in my own organization set me up. They think because I can't walk, I can't fight back. Can you? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. The investigation began slowly, carefully. Taeyang reached out to contacts who had no connection to the main organization. Luke's One information brokers, independent contractors, old friends from university who'd gone legitimate, people who remembered him from before he inherited power, who might still trust the man beneath the reputation. Naomi proved surprisingly useful. Her mother's position in the main household meant she had access to gossip, schedules, personnel changes, small details that might mean nothing individually but formed patterns when assembled carefully. 3 security guards were transferred the week before your attack, she reported one evening as they worked together in his study. All veterans, all replaced by newer hires. Who authorized the transfers? Your cousin's signature, but the request came from Do-hyun. Do-hyun, his trusted second-in-command, who'd stood in the hospital room avoiding eye contact, who'd known his security protocols better than anyone. What about the new guards? Where did they come from? Private security company. Same one that your fiancé Nine's family uses. Ex-fiancé Nine. Sun Mi-young had visited once, 2 days after the attack, to formally end their engagement. She'd been apologetic but firm for her family needed a stronger alliance, someone who could provide protection and advancement. A man in a wheelchair couldn't offer either. Interesting coincidence, Taeyang murmured. There's more. Your cousin has been meeting regularly with Mi-young's father, twice a week, very quiet, very private. The picture was starting to form. Jungwook hadn't just inherited leadership. Jungwook hadn't just inherited leadership of he'd inherited the alliance marriage as well. Mi-young's family got a more appealing husband. Jungwook got legitimacy and connections, and Taeyang got a bullet in the spine. Everyone won except him. We need proof, he said. What kind of proof? Financial records, communication logs, something that shows the conspiracy was planned, not opportunistic. Naomi was quiet for a long moment. I might be able to help with that. How? My mother. She cleans your father's private study twice a week. He's old-fashioned enough for keeps physical files for sensitive business. The risk was enormous. If they were caught, Naomi and her mother would face consequences far worse than termination. But it might be their only chance to expose the truth. It's too dangerous, Taeyang said. That's my decision to make. He studied her face, looking for signs of fear or doubt. Instead,
He saw determination and something else of anger on his behalf. When had anyone been angry for him, rather than at him? "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because it's right. Because you deserve better than this." She met his eyes directly. "And because I care what happens to you." The admission hung between them, changing everything. She cared. Not about his position or power or family name, about him. The man who needed help transferring to his wheelchair, who struggled with phantom pain, who'd lost everything that once defined him. "Naomi," he said softly. "I know it's inappropriate. I know you probably think. I think you're the first real thing in my life in years." She blinked, surprised. "Everyone else wants something from me. Power, money, connections, status. You just stay. You see me at my worst and you stay. Your worst isn't that bad." "Hi." He laughed. The first genuine laugh he'd had since the attack. "I'm a former crime boss in a wheelchair, who's plotting revenge from exile. That's a very specific kind of worst. You're a man who was betrayed by people he trusted, fighting to reclaim his dignity and expose the truth. That's a very specific kind of strength." The way she reframed it made him see himself differently, not as a victim or a fallen leader, but as someone choosing to fight back despite impossible circumstances.
"If we're going to do this," he said, "we do it together. All the way." "All the way," she agreed. 3 days later, they had copies of documents that proved everything. The evidence was damning. Financial transfers between Jung-wook and the private security company. Communication records showing coordination between Do-hyun and Mi-young's father. Most devastating of all, medical records showing Jung-wook had researched spinal injuries and recovery statistics weeks before the attack. He'd known exactly what outcome he was hoping for. They'd planned his attempted murder and his exile with surgical precision. "What now?" Naomi asked as they reviewed the documents in his study. "Now we remind everyone that written off doesn't mean dead." Tae-young had spent 2 months rebuilding his network from the shadows. Old allies who'd been marginalized under Jung-wook's leadership. International contacts who preferred dealing with him directly. Financial advisors who'd been concerned about the organization's new direction. Men who remembered that loyalty was supposed to flow both ways. The first move was financial. Tae-young still had access to accounts Jung-wook didn't know about. Relationships his cousin couldn't claim. Within a week, 3 major contracts had been quietly transferred away from the organization, costing them millions in revenue and credibility. The second move was personal. Key lieutenants received carefully crafted messages containing just enough information to make them question Jung-wook's version of events. Doubt, once planted, spread quickly through an organization built on trust and fear. The third move was public. Anonymous tips to journalists who specialized in organized crime, carefully leaked documents that raised questions about the attack and its convenient timing for certain parties. "Jung-wook called your father in a panic yesterday," Naomi reported. "My mother heard shouting from the study." "Good. Panic makes people careless." "Are you sure about this? Once you go public, there's no going back to quiet exile." Tae-young looked out at the garden, where spring flowers were blooming despite the late snow. Growth was possible, even after devastating damage. Even when everyone expected death. "I'm not going back to anything," he said. "I'm going forward." 2 days later, he called Jung-wook directly. "Tae-yang, what perts one, how are you? We heard there might be some kind of security issue." "Well, there is. Someone's been leaking information about the organization. Financial details, operational plans, personal communications." That's terrible. "Do you know who?" "I have my suspicions." Tae-young kept his voice calm, almost bored. "I think we should meet. Face to face. I have some documents you should see." "Documents?" "About the attack. About who might have wanted me out of the way. About who benefits from my absence." The silence stretched long enough that Tae-young wondered if the connection had been lost. "I don't think that's necessary," Jung-wook said finally. "You should focus on your recovery." "My recovery is going better than expected. Much better. I should be able to travel to Seoul by next week." "Tae-young." Maybe it would be better if you stayed quiet for a while longer. For your own safety. There are still people who might want to hurt you. The threat was barely veiled. Stay silent, stay hidden, or face consequences. You're probably right. But I've never been good at staying quiet. He returned to Seoul on a Tuesday, exactly 4 months after the attack. Naomi sat beside him in the modified van, her hand resting on his arm as they drove through streets that had once felt like his kingdom. The meeting was set for his father's office in the heart of the financial district. Neutral ground, supposedly. Jung-wook would be there, along with Do-hyun and the other senior lieutenants. His father had insisted on presiding over what he called family business. "Are you ready?" Naomi asked as they pulled up to the building. "Are you?" She squeezed his arm. "Together, remember?" The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless. Tae-young had been in this building hundreds of times, but never as anything other than the heir apparent. Today, he was something else entirely, a wild card in an equation his betrayers thought they'd solved. The conference room was exactly as he remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a polished table that could seat 20, expensive art that signaled wealth and taste. His father sat at the head of the table, looking older than Tae-young remembered. Jung-wook sat to his right, perfectly groomed and visibly nervous. Do-hyun was there, along with 3 other senior members. They all stood when he entered, old habits of respect that hadn't quite died. Tae-young. His father's voice was carefully neutral. "You look well. Thank you for seeing me." As he wheeled to the table, Tae-young noticed the subtle positioning. Jung-wook in the power seat. Do-hyun close enough to provide support. The others arrayed to show their allegiance to the new order. Naomi took a position by the window, a briefcase in her hands. Several of the men glanced at her with confusion. Staff weren't usually present at these meetings. "This is Miss Sterling," Tae-young said calmly. "She'll be assisting me today." "Assisting with what?" his father asked. "With presenting evidence of the conspiracy to remove me from leadership through attempted murder." The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. Jung-wook's face went pale. Do-hyun's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. "That's a serious accusation," his father said finally. "It's a serious crime." Tae-young nodded to Naomi, who opened the briefcase and began distributing copies of documents. Financial records showing payments to the security company that provided the guards who were conveniently absent during my attack. Communication logs between Jung-wook and the families who benefited from my removal. Medical research into spinal injuries conducted weeks before anyone knew I'd been shot. As the men read, Tae-young watched their faces. Shock from some. They'd known about the power transition but not the methods used to achieve it. Calculation from others. They were already deciding which side to support. "This proves nothing," Jung-wook said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Coincidence isn't conspiracy." "You're right. Coincidence isn't enough." Tae-young smiled coldly. "That's why I also have recordings." Naomi pressed play on a small device. Do-hyun's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "The route change has to look natural. Security can't suspect anything until it's too late." Another voice, which Tae-young now recognized as one of Mi-young's family associates. "And you're sure the medical outcome will be permanent? The spine shots are specifically designed to paralyze, not kill. He'll be alive but neutralized." The recording stopped. In the silence that followed, Tae-young could hear his father's breathing, heavy and labored. "How long have you known?" the old man asked. 2 months. I've spent the time gathering evidence and rebuilding relationships with people who value loyalty over opportunism." "What do you want?" "I want the truth acknowledged. I want those responsible held accountable. And I want to return to my rightful position in this organization." Jung-wook laughed bitterly. "You can't run anything from a wheelchair." "Can't I?" Tae-young turned to address the room. "In the past month, while sitting in that wheelchair, I've cost this organization 6 major contracts, turned 3 international partners against you, and gathered enough evidence to destroy everyone involved in the conspiracy. I've done it all without leaving my estate, without physical intimidation, without any of the tools you think make a leader." He paused, letting that sink in. Power isn't about standing over people. It's about making them choose to follow you. Respect isn't about fear. It's about proving your worth through actions. Leadership isn't about physical dominance. It's about intelligence, strategy, and earning loyalty. Taeyong looked directly at his father. Jung-wook leads through violence and shortcuts, because he doesn't understand that real power comes from being someone people trust, someone who keeps his word, someone who protects those who serve him faithfully. He gestured toward Naomi, who stood straight and proud despite being the only woman in a room full of dangerous men. Miss Sterling risked her life and her mother's safety to help me uncover this conspiracy. Not because I paid her, not because I threatened her, but because she believed it was right. That's the kind of loyalty that builds lasting power. His father was quiet for a long time, studying the documents, the faces around the table, the evidence of his younger son's betrayal. "The recording," he said finally. "How did you obtain it?" "Does it matter? It's authentic. The voices are verified. The content is damning." Jung-wook? His cousin was staring at the table, all fight gone out of him. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The plan was just to incapacitate him temporarily. Give me time to prove I could lead. By hiring assassins to shoot your cousin in the spine? By creating an opportunity. You were never going to step down, never going to let me show what I could do. And Taeyang was too popular, too entrenched. This was the only way. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Around the table, men who had served the family for decades looked disgusted. Loyalty was everything in their world. Loyalty was everything in their world. One betraying blood was unforgivable. Do-hyun, Taeyong's father, turned to the second in command. "I thought it would be cleaner than a war. Less bloodshed overall." "Less bloodshed." The old man's voice was soft with rage. "You shot my son in the spine to avoid bloodshed." He stood slowly, his age showing in the careful movement. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority that had built their empire. "Jung-wook, Do-hyun, you're out. Permanently, leave Seoul. Don't come back." "Father." 4-1, Jung-wook started. "You're not my son. My son wouldn't have done this." He turned to Taeyong. "The organization is yours. It always was." Taeyong nodded acceptance, then looked around the table at the men who would now report to him again. "The first thing you should know is that Miss Sterling will be joining our leadership team. She's proven herself more loyal and capable than some people who've been here for decades." A few eyebrows rose, but no one protested. They'd seen the evidence of her courage and competence. "The second thing is that we're changing how we operate. Less violence, more intelligence. Less fear, more respect. We're building something sustainable, not just profitable." Taeyong reached for Naomi's hand. She took it without hesitation, standing beside his wheelchair with her head high. "And the third thing is personal. Miss Sterling and I will be married as soon as arrangements can be made. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave with Jung-wook." The silence was complete. An announcement like this, a mafia leader choosing to marry a young black maid, elevating her to the highest levels of power, would have been unthinkable before. But they just witnessed proof that the unthinkable had already happened. A man in a wheelchair had outmaneuvered and defeated healthy men who'd underestimated him. Maybe unthinkable was just another word for unprecedented. Finally, one of the senior lieutenants, Park Il-sung, a man who'd served the family for 30 years, stood and bowed deeply. "Congratulations, sir. When do we start implementing the changes?" "Today," Taeyong said. "We start today." 6 months later, Naomi woke up in their penthouse apartment overlooking Seoul, sunlight streaming through windows that faced the mountains where they'd fallen in love. Taeyong was already awake, sitting by those windows in the wheelchair that had become as much a part of him as his expensive suits and strategic mind. He was reading reports, planning the day's meetings, managing the organization he'd rebuilt from exile. The physical therapy had restored some sensation and movement to his legs, but he would never walk normally again. It didn't matter. He'd learned that strength came in many forms. "Coffee?" she asked, knowing he'd been up for hours already. "Please." He smiled.
the expression that had become her favorite thing in the world. We have the contract signing at 10, lunch with the Busan representatives at 1, and dinner with your mother tonight. Her mother, who'd been promoted to head of household management, and had embraced her new daughter-in-law's unexpected elevation with grace and pride. Busy day. Your best kind.
Naomi brought his coffee and settled into the chair beside him, looking out at the city they'd conquered together. Below them, Seoul pulsed with morning energy. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue. Any regrets? She asked. Their old ritual. About the wheelchair? No, that made me stronger. About the betrayal? No, that taught me who to trust. About choosing you? He reached for her hand, wedding ring catching the morning light. Never. She squeezed his fingers, thinking about the young maid who'd refused to abandon a fallen leader, and the powerful man who'd fallen in love with her courage. Together, they'd proven that real power wasn't about standing over others. It was about having someone stand beside you when the whole world turned away. Outside, Seoul hummed with possibility. Inside, they had coffee and each other, and the quiet certainty that some victories were worth any price. Taeyang had lost everything that didn't matter, and kept everything that did. And from that foundation, they'd built an empire that would last.